Egon, God of Death, 2 generic mana, 1 black mana, legendary creature god, a 6/6 with Death Touch, and at the beginning of your upkeep, exile 2 cards from your graveyard. If you can't, sacrifice Egon and draw a card. Egon is the God of Death. He sits on the Throne of Death, which is the back side of him. It's a 1 black mana for a legendary artifact. At the beginning of your upkeep, mill a card, and it has a activated ability for 2 generic mana and a black. Tap it, exile a creature card from your graveyard, and draw a card. Egon is the God of Death, one of the oldest gods, but it's not really clear if he's related to Alrund, related to Yorn, related to Cosima, anyone else. But he is part of the Scoti family. He currently looks like an angsty teenager, but he ages backwards for some reason. So he's really old. He was born Benjamin Button style, I guess. And then, now that he's old, he looks young again. I don't know. He has a cool story and saga about the zombies of Karfell are kind of his doing. Narfi was the king of Karfell, big, wealthy, fortress, and it was a big, flourishing kingdom. And Narfi's father had signed a pact with the elves, which gave him this magical longship that could travel between the realms. There's a lot of boats that travels between the realms. This is just one of them. And he used this boat to just raid other factions, and that's how the kingdom became so wealthy. And then the elves were like, okay, we gave you this longship, you have to pay us back, or you have to do something for us. We need you to use your now fabulously wealthy army to help us take on the gods and overthrow them. Narfi was like, no, I don't want any of that. You already gave me the boat. I'm just going to keep it. So he was approached by someone. Narfi was approached by someone who would say, hey, how about we go fight the elves, and then you get to keep your boat, and all of your whole kingdom will become immortal, free from death. Narfi says, okay, cool. That way, we're safe. We keep all of our money. Let's go take on the elves. So the elves were defeated, and then it turns out the person who promised him this was Egon, and then their whole army was turned undead, so they would never die, but then they're all zombies forever. And that's how Egon got his realm of the dead and his undead, servants from tricking Narfi into betraying the elves. And that was also one of the fights where the elves, lost, because now one of their allies, the Kingdom of Karfell, turned on them, and the gods were able to win, and the Scoti were, kept being the gods, right? That almost seems to me like a Loki thing where, he was played against someone else and turned to betray, but was the god of the death, god of dead, I guess. God of death, I guess.
No, I think he's much more like the deal with the devil, that you didn't read the fine print on the contract, right?
Right.
This is not
Valky,
betrayal.
Loki is a devil.
It's exactly.
Is Tybalt in in the set, so that's why part of that, it is a deal with the devil, so I expect it to be Loki, even though I guess Loki, Valky, and Tybalt are different. He's just taking his place in the set. But we're going to talk about Karfell again soon, and I guess I get to tell the story again, or maybe I get to skip it. I don't know.
So, can I point out the obvious?
Sure.
Game of Thrones ripoff.
The throne?
Yeah, and Egon being looking like Joffrey, and being a young angsty teenager like Joffrey.
Oh well,
I mean, he kind of looks like him, but I don't think I don't think they behave at all.
No, well, not entirely, but come on, it looks like him. He's got his throne. Joffrey is somebody that is definitely willing to kill as many people as he pleases. It really brings him a lot of pleasure to behead people and keep their heads. And you guys don't see it?
Well,
come on, it's obvious.
It's a bit from the artwork, but I think that a lot of those art tropes that are in Joffrey were there elsewhere, and that it's George that's retelling and copying things. for example, the living backwards, the Benjamin Button approach, that's also used with Merlin in the Once and Future King by T.H. Eliot. It shows up in that the Sword and the Stone movie by Disney, where because he's living backwards, he remembers the future but can't remember the past, kind of thing. That he's. I mean, it's played for laughs in the one story, but it's a very Merlin kind of thing. That it's an old man that's getting younger, and he's now quite a bit younger, but he still has the kind of befuddlement of an old person because of it looks kind of like senility, that all he does is remembers the future and can't remember the past, kind of thing. That's that's played for laughs. That's not associated with death at all. That's just an interesting character trait that shows up, like you pointed out, Benjamin Button, and the picture of Dorian Gray that's not exactly the same thing, but the guy grows younger, whereas the portrait gets all the age is cast into the portrait, so he doesn't look like he's aging, or maybe even getting younger. I don't remember. Those are things that Magic just borrowed. It's interesting with death, because usually death is not portrayed as a youth. That's kind of curious. Yeah.
So my first impression when Will was reading that was, everybody dies of old age. Egon, being the god of death, has the luxury of
dying of baby
reverse. So maybe that's showing he has full control over death, or that the rules of death don't really apply to him in the same way.
Yes, it is interesting that there's a juxtaposition of him being young but old, and him being the god of death but full of teenage vigor or something. There is some interesting parallels there. I don't think he has a whole lot of story besides the one connection to Carfell. He doesn't do much else. One thing that's really noticeable in his portrait is he has a giant scythe, and I know the scythe has a lot of connections to the Grim Reaper and death, but I didn't know if that was something that was also there in Norse mythology. That sort of idea of a Reaper with
the scythe and Reaper is very much a farm implement, and as much as the Vikings did have farms and the like, it's not a noble weapon for a warrior. That's very much a peasant's weapon for fighting against your oppressor. Just like nunchucks are very much not something that the samurai would have, but something a peasant ninja would use against the samurai. Sai is not a Norse noble weapon of the Norse. The figure of death usually is also not something to be feared, right? They don't fear. You're not supposed to fear death, so you're supposed to fear dying poorly, of making bad choices that impinge on your honor. That may be something to fear, or also. There's also a bit of fear of dying of something stupid, like you trip over a rock and you break your neck. That is obviously not a noble death, and you don't get to Valhalla. That's a fair thing to fear, not death itself. Usually, the goddess of death in Norse is considered to be Hela, because she's the goddess of those that die ignobly. There's the other notion of a throne, because I don't think thrones are particularly Nordic. The kings were the war chief. They were not that special, that they were not divine themselves. They were the best warrior of your clan, kind of thing. They did not get thrones in that way that the Egyptians raised the pharaohs to godhood or something like that. But the throne of death does. You were just talking about Joffrey. Well, here's the sword of the throne of swords in the artwork, right? Not exactly, but you could picture that on a card much closer to being something from Game of Thrones.
That's that was kind of my point. I feel like they wanted to pull something from recent pop culture.
Okay.
And they have changed the story. They have changed. They're following Norse mythology roughly, but they're also creating their own tropes, borrowing tropes from other places.
I think the Sai is just a quick symbol of death that you put onto the god of death. I think that's not very Norse.
That's the same connection I made.
In fact, the connection that I think of is the fates are who know the future, and there's a god. There are three goddesses of past, present, and future. Or then they know the threads of your life, and that one of them cuts the thread at death, and scissors in that sense were that required quite a bit of craftsmanship. If you just need to cut something, you used a knife, but scissors are special. They have you need a very well trained blacksmith to hammer out scissors, and to be able to cut a thread is a very powerful image of death in a different way. And I don't know if that's Norse, because it comes up, I think it's Shakespeare.
That's Greek, right? Like I'm just drawing from like Hercules, like cutting the thread.
Yeah, it showed up in Hercules, but I think it also shows up in Shakespeare with the witches and stuff that somehow that that's much more their kind of thing. They aren't the god. They didn't decide when you die. They just knew, well, this is when you die, and so they cut your thread because that was ordained. Not because they wanted to. They didn't mind if you lived another day or died early. That was just how nature worked.
He shows up in one other artwork, Wither Crown, which is a 2-mana black aura with enchanted creature. His base power 0, and as at the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life unless you sacrifice this creature. And the flavor text will see each other again soon. Egon, God of Death. He's in the background wearing, the mirror image crown that the guy in the foreground's wearing. And it almost seems like one's supposed to be the old version of him and one's the young version of him. But, we know he ages, he doesn't wither and get old. He's growing younger. So I guess this is just someone else who's wearing the crown who maybe is rapidly aging and becoming weak. I don't know what the connection is. If you guys have an idea.
I just came up with with another trope. So siphoning life is a common trope, and very much of a black thing in Magic. I mean, it definitely doesn't describe that he is taking the life from his victims, but Withercrown kind of makes that seem like it's the case.
Yeah, Withercrown seems to
like there's a connection to the people that are.
It seems to be making
that are dying.
Whoever's wearing the crown closer to death. I don't know if he's necessarily taking the power, if he's just causing someone to get weaker and start to die, or become dying. I don't know if he's necessarily drawing anything from it, because it doesn't exactly gain life. It just saps your opponent or saps the creature or something like that.
I've played against both sides of this quite a bit. Throne of Death is what you probably would think. It's a good card advantage engine. Not too much in recent sets that really work with the graveyard all that well. But just being able to pay 3 and draw a card every now and then when you have extra mana is a very good thing. And then Egon himself is a lot better than I expected. When he's in play, I keep looking at the graveyard. It's like, okay, they only have 2 cards. Oh, okay, they only have 3 cards. It's going to die soon. I'm going to focus on my removal on other creatures. And then they're able to, cast a few cards, and it's still in play, and it's still hitting you.
Right. As you're busy dealing with the other creatures, they go to the graveyard, and he can just keep removing those to keep them alive.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really good. I think we talked about this this Egon specifically too. Death Touch not being very good on 6/6s.
Like grave.
Although if a lot of equipment give trample, and if you ever give trample to a large death touching creature, then they're able to just deal 1 damage to the creature and then trample the rest of the damage over.
Or
so I think it's actually quite good that he has
touch is better than
touch.
just regular Menace too, because you get to guarantee you kill both the blockers.
Yeah, it's really good with Menace too. That's very true.
Yeah, so I mean, it's better than if you didn't have Death Touch, but like Death Touch wouldn't mean as much as First Strike or Menace or Trample.
And it totally makes sense flavor why he has Death Touch too.
Yeah, of course.
And he draws a card when he sacrificed. So even worst case scenario, you have 0 cards in your graveyard. You just need a quick cantrip.
You block once.
Yeah.
We're threatened to block once.
Can hold off blockers for a turn and then draw a card. So very versatile card.